Here we go. Okay, thank you. I apologize for all the nonsense. But anyway, like I said, Chris asked me a year ago to do a short presentation. Here's a longer one that I did about a year ago for a different organization. This is a variation on that. So here we go. Top 10 things. To me, the most amazing thing, wow, we jumped it, is that it's just wonderful. You know, you get to interact with stuff like this, such intricate, beautiful stuff on a regular basis. This is prairie smoke as the seed heads are unfurling. I've only seen that once. I happen to have my phone with my hand. That's how I do a lot of this, is with my phone. You know, the little things that run the world, they're just all over these native gardens. There's this thing that happens where plants take sunshine, carbon dioxide, and water. They make oxygen and sugar. Think about that. What kind of a deal is that? That's extraordinary. And it's happening all the time. And wow, what happened there? Okay. Hope that doesn't happen very often. You know, this sugar, it comes out, the main way that it gets moved from the plant kingdom to the animal kingdom is through insects. So I love it when I see aphids all over my swamp milkweed like this early in the season, because I know that there are a lot of different insects and organisms that live off of these aphids, and that those things, all those populations are getting reinforced and built up to make my garden more resilient through the coming year. And, you know, there are bees that have mouth parts that fit only specific flowers. And just the few weeks of the year that flower is in bloom is the only time that insect can be active as an adult. The rest of the year, it has to be either an egg, a larva, or a pupa. And so with these gardens, we need to provide habitat for all those different life stages of all these different insects. The butterflies go through a lot of changes. The one on the left here is kind of beat up. He's been around for a while. The one on the right just came out of that chrysalis and it's still pumping itself up. And before they're even a chrysalis, they're caterpillars, which are two things that are really important about them is that they're host specific. We know about monarchs eating milkweed and fritillaries eating violets, and it's like that throughout all these different moths and caterpillars. I just want to say that there's 15 times as many moths as there are caterpillars. I mean, as there are butterflies. So we need to really pay attention to not just the showy stuff that we see in the summertime, but the moths too. And they're not only are they host specific, but they're the main food for baby songbirds. Most of our baby songbirds most of our songbirds feed their babies nothing but caterpillars and a pair of chickadees, which when they're adults, they're a third of an ounce each. A pair of those, they lay 6 or 7 eggs probably, and it takes them 17 days from the day they hatch until they leave the nest. And in that 17 days, they're going to need 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars, which is just extraordinary. High number. They can't fly very far to get these. They're not going to get any of them on ginkgo trees or Norway maples. They're going to get them mostly on our native trees. Our herbaceous plants help some, but not near as much. These, of course, are not my pictures. They're from Doug Tallamy, who popularized this idea starting 15 years ago. If you have not read these books, just do. Just do. I've wasted a lot of time not knowing what's in here. The sun takes this, makes this oxygen, this sugar, and it puts it in the ground. A third of a plant's fruit production comes out of the root tips as sugar water to feed the microbes in the soil. The microbes bring water and nutrients to the plant, and when they metabolize the sugar, they make plant growth hormones, which create growth at the top of the plant. It's a whole interconnected thing, and when you're working with native plants, you get to have a tighter, more intimate relationship with all these processes because you're making them happen in combinations that where they happen in the real world. And the root systems are incredible. They grow, up to 15 feet deep, and the tap roots, they stay, but in the wintertime, all that fibrous roots, or a lot of the fibrous material, rots, which makes the soil more permeable to water, so that stormwater can go through the soil instead of on top of it, which is how it used to. And all that stored organic matter is carbon-based, and this is carbon sequestration at its best. If that interests you at all, then we want to have these plants, and we want to not disturb the soil, because it's right there. Okay, so that's wonderful stuff. And a good way to make this happen is to use a cool season ground cover layer. I did this presentation to you a year ago. I'm going to, do a shorter version, but I've got a deeper knowledge of it than I did. So I want to tell you what is going on. You want to use this to help make your garden look intentional and be easier to maintain. This is a garden that looks intentional. And I used to maintain this, and it was really easy, and it was always beautiful because they're globs. I mean, don't just look at colors, look at textures and shapes, and you see these different things, and it makes it look like they did it on purpose. And that way people aren't afraid. I advocate putting these gardens in front yards. In the backyard, we have other uses. We play bags, our dogs run, whatever we want to do back there. But we grow food. That's what we do in our backyard. But in the front yards are just to look at. So let's give them something to look at. We can really do that with native plants. And you have these big globs of different textures and colors, like this. And so you have swaths and drifts of stuff like that going through, and repeating elements. And even this picture, which there's a lot of stuff going on here, it looks kind of chaotic, but because you have the repeating pink and the repeating yellow, it kind of ties the whole thing back together. And the thing about this place, though, was that it was incredibly easy to maintain. I would go there every 2 weeks and not even clock in any time because there weren't any weeds. I never understood why. And then, as many of you have heard me talk about, I saw a presentation by Thomas Rayner, who wrote this book with his collaborator, which Doug Tallamy calls the Universal How-To Guide to Sustainable Landscaping. We have all been waiting for, and I believe it is. They advocate that you think of your design in layers, where you have big structural stuff, trees and gazebos, and even your house, anything that's really big and stays there. And then below that, you have swaths and drifts of the kind of color that I showed before. But the magic happens down below it all in your ground cover layer, where you put cool season plants, native plants, that have the ground covered before the weeds start to germinate. And it's just an everlasting mulch that takes care of your weed problems much better than artificial mulch. I got real excited about this, and I went back to this property the next week and saw the homeowner and told her about all this wonderful stuff I'd learned. And then we looked around her property and realized that was exactly what she was doing. That's why it was so easy to work there, that she had ajuga, which isn't native, and sedums and different I can't remember what the different geraniums growing, but they were low growing, but they weren't all native. So what are some natives we can use to do this? Sedges are essential early in the season for drying out the soils, keeping other roots from rotting. And in the heat of the summer, when they're dormant, they act as dew collectors every night, put moisture back in the ground. They're essential to our ecosystems around here. Gerald Wilhelm calls pen sedge, which this is, the keystone species of the oak savanna. And there are other sedges. The albicans here and the rosea are both clump forming. Jamesii is a lot like pen sedge. And there are other ones. You have to be careful with sedges. I'll show you one later that's bad. Some of them, they get so big and rangy that they really don't look good. And these gardens have to be pretty. It's just all there is to it. So be careful about which ones you pick. Talk to people who know about sedges before you pick a sedge to use. Some other plants, the pussy toes, cover the ground really well early in the season, especially in hot, dry places. And then the purple poppy mallow or wine cups, early in the season, they lay down on the ground and cover it effectively. Then in June and July, they stand up and put on a heck of a show. So they're a great plant to use. This is called robin's plantain. And here it is. This is a second-year plant next to some Carex albicans, which I mentioned before, a nice clump-forming sedge. The robin's plantain, you see how much in a second year grown from just a start, a division off another plant, is already that big. Filling in May, it puts on these flower stems that bloom with these nice little white daisies. But the cool thing about this stuff, this is at, can't remember the name of that place. I'm sorry. In Baltimore, where the Orioles baseball stadium is. A lot of people know, right outside the Baltimore Orioles baseball stadium, right next to a sidewalk where thousands of people walk by and no doubt trample this. It doesn't get maintenance. You can tell because this picture was taken in September, and what looks like straw in this picture is the flower stems from the blooms the previous May. So, this stuff doesn't get maintenance. All the other plants have been trampled out. Look how tough this is, robin's plantain. Think about using this in your landscapes. Lori Ryan at the Conservation District says she's found it in sites around here, in remnants. It does grow around here. This is golden ragwort, which these are second-year plants in May getting ready to bloom. But here it is again at, that's amazing. I can't remember the place in Baltimore, the name of that place, but right outside of Orioles Stadium. It's Camden Yards. Whew. Camden Yards is where both the stadiums in Baltimore are. And this is right there in the middle of it, where all the traffic is. There's not even a curb here. And this is the golden ragwort. And both of these pictures, these are 10-year-old plantings that have received basically no maintenance for 10 years. And this stuff is just hanging in there. So it's really tough and covers the ground early in the season. Our violets are great. Here's a picture at a place in our yard where we just planted a bunch of shrubs and let it shade out the turf, and the violets took over completely. After a while, as the shade's gotten denser, they've started thinning out. So we're planting our native ginger in here, and that works really nicely because look how thick it grows. But my favorite is the prairie smoke, and you're going to get sick of watching my prairie smoke pictures. These are in April, April into May, when daffodils are blooming. And it's so pretty early in the year. Here it is in June when it's making its seed heads. They're pretty nice with the panstemon blooming. And then in July, the picture on the right is in July. And these are old stems that within a couple of weeks after this, they finally got, after 4 weeks of being really pretty, they finally got ugly. And I crawled through there and broke them all off. And then the rest of the year, these swaths of prairie smoke create divisions between the big plants, which is something we lack in a lot of our native gardens. Makes them look so messy. When you can have space in between the plants that is all plants, space between the plants, it's all plants. And those swaths between the plants is where I walk the rest of the year when I worked in the garden. They'll take a little bit of foot traffic, not a lot. Some other things that they aren't necessarily ground covers early in the year, but they're active early in the year. So they cover ground, our native heuchera, alum root, and our native geraniums. They're great for getting the ground covered early in the year. And you can mix these things because the more different things you have mixed together, the more different shapes of root systems you have. So it's improving your soil and storing, doing all that good stuff in the soil even better. And think of your composition as like a Persian rug, where from a distance you see the big, bold patterns, but as you get closer up, you see the little fine details that can be really nice when you mix these plants together. But my objective with this stuff is to make so much competition in my garden that here we have showy goldenrod, which in my garden is 6 feet tall. Here it is at Lake in the Hills Spen. It's 1 foot to 1.5 feet tall because of all the competition. So without making our gardens look messy, let's see if we can make them have enough competition that the showy goldenrod is only, say, 3 feet tall. To me, that'd be a great accomplishment. And I challenge anybody here to try to do that. If you get it done before I do, I'll come work at your place for a day, because I really appreciate what you did. So that's where I think we can go with these cool season ground covers. So preparing a site, killing stuff, your soil's fine. Plants build soil. It's not the other way around. We're not growing corn. We're growing native plants, and they will build the soil. All we have to do is put them in the ground, give them a place to live. You don't need to modify the soil. So we're killing stuff. And the WPPC has a handout on site preps that's great for killing turf, which it's important that we kill turf whenever we can, and other shallow-rooted stuff. So I'm going to talk about killing stuff that's harder than that, because there are a lot of things that are remnants in a lot of the gardens that we try to revive that are really hard to kill. You guys know these. If you're gardeners at all, bishop's weed, also called goutweed, really hard to get rid of. Most of these plants are hard to get rid of. Even the hostas and the daylilies, unless you want to cause a lot of soil disturbance, they're work to get rid of. And we don't want to disturb the soil any more than we have. So I had a situation right next to my house where my neighbor, excuse me. New people had moved into this house, and they were stuck with this, which literally in this bed, you can't really tell, but almost everything I had listed on that previous slide is in here, one place or another. It was an amazing thing. And the right edge of the picture is my property line, and it was always trying to crawl onto my property. And so I asked the neighbor if I could get rid of it, and got permission. And what I did was, when I heard a tree crew working in my neighborhood with that big chipper grinding stuff up, I went over, asked 2 questions. Is it a live tree that you're cutting? And do you need a place to dump? And the answer to both questions was yes. They came over, and I spread this out. It took a day to spread it out, about 1.5 feet thick. This was in July. I'd read about this, or actually I heard a presentation by a woman from the University of Washington who advocates doing this. And I did this in July. The next spring, a few things came up. Not too bad. I hoed them out, and nothing followed them except with the field bindweed. This stuff has 30-foot root systems. It's really hard to kill. There's so much energy storage underground that it just keeps coming back. And so I got another load of wood chips, and I piled another foot on top of all that stuff. And this past year, I had no bindweed come up in this whatsoever. That doesn't mean it won't in the future, but it's killed it. It's not a garden by any means yet. Eventually, as that stuff decomposes, stuff will come up in there. We'll start planting stuff in there. We'll turn it into a garden. It's going to take a while, so you just have to be patient on this stuff. If you're in a hurry, paper or plastic, silk, that's good if you're in a hurry. If you want to have something like this, then it's going to take some time to get it to where you don't have to be fighting those nasty weeds. Okay, so planting. What I generally say the smaller the better. First thing I do towards planting a new garden is in the fall when my neighbors put their leaves out on the street for the city to pick up. I go get them and haul them home and put them in the driveway and mow them up. And I just spread them out over the ground that I want to plant and then lay out the plants on top of it. And you want to go with small plants because with a small plant, you're not buying all that potting soil, you're buying plants. You don't want to buy a bunch of potting soil, and you're making small disturbance in the weeds, in the soil, which means soil is always full of weed seeds. So the less you disturb it, the fewer weeds you have, and all that other stuff with the soil that I talked about before. Augers are really handy for this. You can get augers that'll go right on a power drill. You can run an extension cord out from the house and drill the holes. As far as spacing, the Prairie Nursery, towards the back of their catalog, they have their it's blocking off this cultural guide. I can't see the word because where it says you are screen sharing is blocked off. Anyway, they have this in the back of the Prairie Nursery, and it gives you spacing ideas. The Prairie Moon Nursery has a cultural guide, which has all kinds of great information about your plants. But I just want you to keep in mind that the plants don't read the books. Think if those coneflowers were laid out, this is at Lake in the Hills Fen, and if those coneflowers were laid out there on 1 foot spacing, like it says in the book, that wouldn't be near as pretty. So when you lay out your plants, use your imagination a little bit. And when you have I had to show you this picture on the right, which is a cup plant, which many of us have bad experiences with because they planted one and they got them coming up everywhere. And this is out in Lake in the Hills Fen. This one plant has been there for a long time and it hasn't spread because of the natural conditions. So keep that in mind. Woody plants. This is an oak tree that I transplanted. You see the nice big taproot on it? People really like taproots. And a taproot supports the tree for the first 2, 3, maybe 5 years of its life when it needs extra energy storage underground because it's getting burned by fire or eaten off by different animals. But what's going to sustain this tree for decades, hopefully centuries to come, is the lateral roots close to the surface. And research has been done. It's conclusive. The more lateral roots there are close to the surface of the ground, the more vigorous the tree is. Unfortunately, in the landscape trade, this is how they start trees, with all the roots growing straight down. And it's no good. But lately, there are people using what are called air root pruning containers, which give you a nice fibrous root system. The one on the right here, you put that in the ground and you will have dozens of lateral roots close to the ground. It's so much better. The one on the left has circling roots. It's garbage. So that you want either bare root plants or grown in air root pruning containers. And we're really lucky around here. It's not like this everywhere else, but Possibility Place has been using these containers for decades. Majestic Oaks Nursery uses these containers. And there are more and more places all the time that do. They're all specialty growers. You go to a nursery, you're probably not going to find this quality of stuff. You want to thoroughly water in all plants immediately after planting. Do this by hand while staying in motion. Don't pour water on one place and drive all the oxygen out of the soil. Nobody who's living in there likes the oxygen being gone from the soil. And don't rely on rain. If the forecast is, if you're planting and the forecast says it's going to rain, that's the best possible time to water. Because if the ground's already wet when the rain comes, there's gases dissolved in those raindrops. They dissolve right into and those gases are nitrogen and oxygen, which are both really good for plants. So, and or irrigation systems, you can't rely on. They don't know how wet the ground is. Some plants might never receive another drop. I have plants in my yard that I've never watered since the day I put them in the ground. I mean, 2 or 3 weeks after I put them in the ground, I've never watered them again. And they're doing just fine. It's been years. So expectations. This is a second-year planting, freshly mulched with composted leaves. And in April, second-year planting in April, here it is that same year in June. Really starting to fill in nicely. I'd like you to look at a couple of things here. To the left in the background is that place I showed you that I killed off with the wood chips. This is long before I did that. Gives you an idea how robust that mess was. And the chunks of wood laying around. Chunks of wood are important because different things use them for nesting. Here we have, I believe this is a sphinx moth cocoon. And here is in our yard, this is a chickadee nest in a chunk of wood that I just left standing out in the garden. But also this picture, okay, so here we are, this is second year in June. Here we are a year later, third year in June. Gives you an idea how quickly this stuff fills in. But I'd like to point out something that you need to expect. It's in the foreground, this grassy looking stuff. This is evidence that whatever you do, you're gonna make mistakes. And this was, you have to expect to make mistakes. And this was palm sedge that I allowed in here and thought it was pretty cool for a few years. And then it kept getting so big and rangy and just wiping out the legibility of my composition. And it didn't matter what I planted in there, it just always looked like a big amorphous green blob. And so after several years of trying to deal with this palm sedge, I finally got tired of it. Yeah, that's what it's called. I finally got tired of it and started digging it out and decimated the front of my garden just completely. And it was just a couple of weeks after this that I saw Thomas Rainer talk about the cool season ground covers. And I had clumps of prairie smoke growing in here that had survived the onslaught of the palm sedge. And so after I saw Thomas Rainer, I started dividing them and moving them around and turned that mess into this. And you're gonna make mistakes. And when it happens, you have to, if I acknowledged that quicker, it would have been less work. I'll say that. So when you make a mistake, you have to acknowledge you did it. Talk to somebody, and we'll talk about that, talking to other people. You also have to expect that you're going to end up with just too many plants. This is pretty, but there's just too much stuff going on in here. And when you do that, you have to remove stuff. I often remove common milkweed. After it blooms, after it's done blooming, I'll go through and I look really carefully on the upper leaves, make sure there aren't any caterpillars or eggs of the monarchs. And if they don't have those, I pull them out. The next year, there's more than enough again, and haul them off. And the other thing you have to expect is that your friends will stop coming by because you're always trying to give them plants. Our backyard's full of them. We're always loading them into other people's cars. So let's talk about maintenance for a minute. Maintenance. It's basically watering and weeding. And watering, we kind of talked about a little bit. I'm not going to go into that too much. You want to keep them even. A new garden, you're not going for wet. You're looking moist, nice and evenly moist. Always remember that you can't tell by looking at a plant whether it's too dry or too wet, because in either case the roots start dying, and the results above ground are pretty similar. So you got to dig in and find out. And the best thing about an irrigation system is the off switch. If you have one already on your property, don't tear it out. Use it once in a while, but turn it on, turn it back off. Don't rely on a timer or a rain sensor to tell you when that happens. And always remember that plant roots need oxygen. Weeds. This is prairie petunia, which is beautiful. I had it in my yard for a while, and then I decided it was ruining the legibility. It was just too aggressive, and now I consider it a weed. The clover you see there, that's oxalis, wood sorrel. It's pretty in that picture. Why would you want to mess with that? But eventually you're going to have to pull it out. You have to, be kind of relaxed about this. There are some plants like the goldenrods that are so essential to our gardens. They support more different kinds of caterpillars than any of the other herbaceous plants. They provide for insects in the fall with their pollen, which is extremely nutritious. It's also heavy, does not blow in the wind and cause allergies. It's only carried by insects. But there are some bad ones, like the common goldenrod, Missouri goldenrod, tall goldenrod, Canada goldenrod, common. I just made that up. That was wrong. And these spread by underground rhizomes, stems under the ground. And this is a first-year plant. It's already that big. And second-year plant is going to be much, much bigger. You got to get them out of the ground while they're little. They're innocuous looking. You might not notice them, but you have to get them out. And the smaller you get them out, the less you disturb the soil and all of these hard workers that are in there rooting for you, okay? And get them out small, because less soil disturbance equals less weeds. Some weeds are so persistent that we just need to make our peace with them, because you don't go picking fights that you can't win. Creeping Charlie, if you can keep it out of your yard, do. Don't take plants from people who have Creeping Charlie unless you leave it in a pot for a year and make sure there's none going to grow out of that pot. Don't take those plants. Don't let it in. But if you can, once it's in, you're going to have to live with it. You're not going to win that fight. So, don't let it crawl over the top of stuff. Wood sorrel, which I showed you before, late in the season when it's making seed, you might start pulling it out. Nut sedge, in my experience, the harder you fight against it, the harder it is to get rid of. Black medic lays real close to the ground. I don't see anything wrong with it. And prairie petunia has joined this category for me. Didn't used to be in here. There are good reasons to kill a weed. It's ugly, it ruins the legibility of the composition. It's about to produce a lot of seed, or it has the rhizomes. But all the other reasons, I've heard so many stories. Oh, I just hate that weed. Just get over it. Pick fights that you can win. These are the tools that I use. I'll show you how I use these hose in a minute. I use Soul Knife is so much better than a trowel, which I used to use. A pruner's, and I use a spade for some things. I use all of them as shallowly as possible. This is where I took a pruner's and jabbed it in the ground and cut off an elm tree an inch below the soil level. The red arrows are the soil level. And I cut it off there, and it's not growing back as long as sunlight can't get to where I cut it off. So that's how I weed, with the pruners. And when I do that, I don't have to pull the whole little tree. It wouldn't be hard to pull that tree out of the ground, but it makes a mess and fewer weeds. All right, all that good stuff. So here is, hopefully this will come up. There we go. There we go. And this is me using one of those hose. And all I'm doing is shaving the surface of the ground. I'm not digging into the ground at all. This is in a vegetable garden, so I'm killing everything. But I'm leaving the roots in the ground to rot out and help feed my food that I'm going to grow in here. And that's what I love about these. And you can work in really close spots with these hoses, the way they're made. Okay, but you don't want to kill everything, because this is a, what is this stuff coming up? This was at a school in Fox River Grove, and in between all these coneflowers, there was this grass-looking stuff come up. And what the heck is that? It turns out it's all Liatris, which is a beautiful plant that brings in butterflies great. But when you look at this, Liatris in here would be great, but you sure don't need that much of it. So how are you going to deal with that? Well, what I do, this was a population of something that I didn't know for sure what it was. It was right next to this, which is kind of the same color, which I knew was a penstemon, so it was probably penstemon. Didn't know for sure, but I know what I do know for sure looking at it is that there's more of it than I need. And I could transplant some out, and I could move some around or pot some up if I had time. This day I didn't have time. I was maintaining tens of thousands of square feet. This was 1 square feet, 1 square foot. So hopefully this is going to come around. Yeah. So I came in 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004. In less than 5 seconds, I've thinned this out. And when I come back in a week or so, I might readdress it. I might give it another 3 or 4 seconds. But you thin that things out really fast. You don't have to let this work gobble up your life. And get these things while they're small, because preventing problems is the key to maintenance. And don't worry about all the little details. People aren't going to see them. Believe me. Fall and spring cleanups, forget that stuff. Don't clean up anything, please. Cut back stuff and leave the leaves. Here's a good reason. This is a comma butterfly, which overwinters here as an adult butterfly in leaf litter. And he's not going to survive a rake or a blower or a mower or anything we do. We just need to leave him alone, because early in the spring, this is one of the first butterflies to grow up or to fly up into the trees as they're leafing out, and to lay eggs, which will feed the first generation of baby birds that year. So it's important that we leave these guys alone. The polyphemus moth is another good example. This is the one on the cocoon on the right is not my picture. I don't do work that good. This is Doug Talamies. He sent it to me because he's a really nice guy. But that's the net, that's the cocoon. And oftentimes they fall off and they're laying in the leaf litter. Don't clean up the leaves. He sent me both of these, a Luna moth and its cocoon, which it's just a blob in the leaf litter. You'll never see it. Leave the leaves alone. We never see these moths because they fly at night. But there are 15 times as many moths as there are butterflies. It's amazing. Here's clean up my front yard in March. This is what it looks like pretty much right now, although this was a different year. And, it was nice leaving all that stuff in the fall, but now it's looking kind of ratty. And in just 20 minutes or so, I changed it to that, using nothing but these. I like to use a like battery-powered hedge trimmer. Those are really nice for doing this work, but any kind of lopper type thing will work. You'll notice I've left some stems that are important for nesting for certain insects, but often they don't use these stems till they're 2 or 3 years old, so you have to be strategic about where you leave them standing. Here's the incomparable Horacio Suarez taking down a big switchgrass with a weed whacker. Like I said, I prefer a hedge trimmer. He's using a weed whacker. It took him 1 minute and 22 seconds to knock this thing down to the ground, clean it up, left all the organic matter there as mulch, and seed or insect eggs that were on that stuff. A lot of them are still there, and did this whole bed in maybe half an hour, cleaned it up, and everything is left there. It's really a simple way to do the work. Record keeping and labels. When you talk about record keeping and gardening, I have to think about, it just immediately makes me think about Thomas Jefferson. and George Washington and the gardening experiments that these guys did, which are written about by this woman, Andrew Wolfe, and how detailed of records they kept of all the different stuff they did. But what I found is, personally, a lot of my record keeping is pictures on my phone. They have dates on them. They show the plants. And if I wrote it down somewhere on a piece of paper, I'd probably lose it, but I can find my phone. So, record keeping in whatever form suits you is a good idea, to keep track of where you put things, when you put them in, how they do. Labels. When I was at the zoo in Kansas, I had a machine in my office where I made labels for the zoo and the park and the police department and city hall. And this is my souvenir from there, from those golden days. And if you know somebody who has a machine that'll do this kind of engraving, it's really nice. They're durable. They're pretty good. Mary Handelsman shared with us some pictures of a system, 2 different systems that she uses. She says that these the labels persist. There's nothing worse than making a label, going back to a garden, and finding that you can't read it anymore. It's washed out. And she says these persist. She can read them, several years after she makes them. She uses equipment made by these 2 companies. And this is what the equipment looks like. And so this is great for learning the names of the plants, but I'd just like to say that learning the names is just the beginning. These 2 guys who used to work with me, Mexican landscape laborers, best gardeners I've ever met, didn't know the name of a single plant, but they knew the plants. They had relationships with them. They knew how one plant would affect another one because they were out there experiencing them. And that's the thing. When we get out and interact with the plants and interact with each other with the plants, we learn a lot more stuff. Here's 4 people, counting the person who took this picture, just obsessing over one little plant out in this barrens. And there's the flower that we were making all that fuss over. I don't even know its name, but I know its natural history. I know where it grows on these really poor soils of the serpentine barrens of Maryland. And, you have to, learning the names is just the beginning. Okay, other gardeners are your best resource. Talking about these guys again, I was kind of influenced by this book because this woman took a deep dive into the letters that these guys wrote to each other and to other people. And what you find consistently is the most common topic in all of their letters is horticulture. And you eventually find that, there's somebody wanting you to get in, sorry. Okay. And what you eventually find is that really everything they did, according to the things that like George Washington wrote, everything he did, from revolution to independence to, some of these guys did years-long diplomatic missions in Europe, and then they, wrote the Constitution and formed a government, and then they actually governed. And consistently in their writings, they expressed that everything they did was so they could go home and garden. That's what they really cared about. And so that you and I could go home and garden, because of all the things that these guys had to disagree on, which was just about everything, they agreed that the flora of North America would create great prosperity for the people. And that just amazed me when I read that's what and so what they did was they did experiments with different plants, and they wrote everything down, and they wrote to each other about it, and they formed a community of gardeners. And a lot of other stuff that happened grew out of this community of gardeners, because this is what they really believed in. And what I have found in different settings, whether it be in North Lawndale or the suburbs of, wherever, is that community gardening builds community. It just does. When people work together, working with plants, it builds community. This is a project in Trout Valley. These people got together, did some work, and ended up having these community events that changed. At the time this happened, I was working in Trout Valley. I had clients there, and their point of view during this time changed from where they looked at me funny when I talked about taking out burning bush to where they brought it up. So that's a big deal as far as I'm concerned. We have organizations around here that promote this kind of community. Many of you are familiar with the Conservation at Home program, and Sarah McHale, she talks to so many different gardeners every week, and she learns different things from everybody. She doesn't claim to know anything, although she knows a lot, but she's always learning and sharing ideas, and that's what we need to be doing. And of course, here I'm talking to the choir. When I talk to other organizations, I always bring up the WPPC, especially the mentoring program. I think it's an incredibly, potentially powerful model for how to spread the word on doing this kind of work. Within the mentoring committee, we have the Helping Hands Committee, which does work projects. We also do consultations where, like here with this lovely lady who many of you know in the blue shirt, is pointing out what she perceives to be a aesthetic weakness in her landscape. And we're proposing that she just tear a bunch of this yellow stuff out. And we're agreeing with her, which is what we mostly do on that committee, is agree with people, because they already know. They have a relationship with the place, and they already know what needs to happen, but they don't know that they're allowed to do that. So we tell them, yeah, go ahead and do that if you want to have something like this. And you can. So, relationship with the place, I just talked about that. When after a while you get to here on the left, this is Silene regia, royal catchfly. On the left is a plant the evening before it's going to open up its first blooms. And when I took this picture, I said to myself, tomorrow morning, this is right outside our front door. I said, tomorrow morning at 5:30, I can look out the window and I will see a hummingbird on here. And I did, because you just get to know these things about these plants. That when you see this kind of a mess, that you can transform that to where these magnificent beasts will grow, that will color up like this, and then bring in all kinds of crazy butterflies. It's great. And that when the color that just lasts a few weeks on the butterfly milkweed, sometime after it's done that, it might do this. And that it's the same thing, just expressing itself differently. And that every spring you're going to get these shooting stars. And the fall colors are going to be just so many different shades and colors. And the autumn frosts and the winter snows and the spring blooms and the wonderful summers. I'd just like to finish with a quote from Wendell Berry. The care of the earth is our most ancient and most worthy, and after all, our most pleasing responsibility. To cherish what remains of it and to foster its renewal is our only legitimate hope. Legitimate hope. It's quite a term. Anyway, thank you. There's some, if anybody has questions, that, we have time now. Hopefully that didn't take oh, wow, I did that in an hour. But if you have questions afterwards, there's my email address. You can contact me at that. I have some content on YouTube. And hi, Chris.
Hi, thank you so much, Ken. That was wonderful. And
Great.
my statement about I always learn something new, I always learn something new. Thank you so much for your presentation this evening.